Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Um, so I'm just gonna let you in on a little secret. Me and him actually recorded a video earlier. Got about 25 minutes in, and then realized that the audio not hooked up. Very unfortunate, but he actually did come in at the end of me making my video that I made earlier, which is understanding dreams using perceptual resonance across already forgetting it, but you know what, that's fine. The video name is still there. And so whenever he came in, he had a few questions. And so we're just going to kind of go over that. And
so on watching back that video, the first thing that I immediately thought of was when you were talking about experiencing different versions of yourself infinitely and how you were viewing possibly certain things in their life. My immediate thought was about lucid dreaming and
Right.
how lucid dreaming connects with that.
right,
And, so like in lucid dreaming, you realize you have a certain level of control.
Right.
The thing that I like to, my most recent lucid dreaming event is, I was running and I stopped and I, for whatever reason, realized that I was dreaming. And I thought, fly, and so
Right.
the thing about that is, there's a certain extent to where when you view dreams from other people, that's to a certain extent non-fiction, depending on how you're looking at it.
Right.
Whereas lucid dreaming, where you have control over certain things, has to be fiction. Like that's something that you have full control over. And so I
Right.
didn't know if it was like maybe a percentage thing, or if some people are more likely to lucid dream than others, and does that also mean that those people are less likely to
right.
view the windows, if that makes sense?
I think that's a really interesting question. Whenever I think of lucid dreaming, because you're right, it does have that element to it where it feels more nonfiction, or it feels more fiction. It feels like more just like a dream. Like everything around you is kind of just like warping or changing, and it's not set, right? Because you have dreams where maybe you are experiencing something through the eyes of someone else's subconscious. Like you're in the place of someone's subconscious, right? And you don't have any control. You're just kind of looking at whatever they're looking at, and you can impose thought or whatever, but you can't really choose. And so with lucid dreaming, I would have to imagine that is at its core. So we talked about basically resonating frequencies, and how these different resonating frequencies can allow your basically tuning frequency, your basic frequency, to leave your body and go out of your body. And that is how essentially, you're finding these versions of yourself, and you're at a specific point in time, whereas they're at a specific point in time that does not correlate to our specific point in time. And you were basically going and experiencing that. But with lucid dreaming, obviously it has to be different. Obviously there has to be a level to it where your brain is taking creative control. And so one of the things that I did remember mentioning, the first take around, is that on the first video I mentioned how it's possible that your brain receives like a little tiny broadcast. Like, and the way that I interpreted it was like if you're driving in your car, right, and you're kind of far away from any signal, and you hear like, and that is all first of static, right? And I mentioned like, obviously this type of stuff where you are having dreams of the future, or you're having visions of things that may happen, or hearing things like someone may die or anything like that. That's crazy, right? Completely insane. But the idea is that you kind of losing it. Do you?
So the thing that I was thinking about, just based on
Right.
what you've said, is we were talking about frequencies and
Right.
catching snippets and things like that. And I know in the original video that you made, you had mentioned the different known frequencies like beta, alpha, theta, and delta.
Right.
And I was thinking about how you must be more susceptible to certain things like that based on certain frequencies. And so it's like, that's why the lower frequency you get, it seems more apt to be able to catch those frequencies. And that
Right.
made me think about one of the things that we talked about, which was, obviously some people are more apt to experience
Right.
unnatural things than others. And it made me think about how you seem to be more inclined to do that than a lot of people. And
Right.
I think that that's largely, or at least in part, due to your literal brush with death when you were
Right.
young. And so it's talking about, I was like, when you're dead, my thought is that your frequency is 0, which
Right.
is the lowest you can get.
Right.
And so that kind of makes it easier. Once you've had that experience, it's easier to tune back in. Like, you do something once, it's easier to do it again, even if it might not be the same or this, that, or whatever.
It does seem that the lower your frequency goes, the more susceptible you are. And also, just for the listeners, just for context, whenever I was born, there was a lot of complications leading into that, and unfortunately, I did pass. But fortunately, it's like that. What's that guy from Ice Age?
Said the sloth.
He's like, they're asking him like, "Did you die?"
Buck.
Yes, and he's like, "Unfortunately, yes, but I lived." That's me. They resuscitated me. And I've had a lifetime of paranormal instances and different occurrences that I attribute to being related to that. But to the extent of it being in relation to dreams, I think that there could be a correlation. Like, I experience these dreams a lot, and going back to like the idea of lucid dreaming and the kind of finish my point about like the radio broadcast, a snippet, is that, for instance, with like a lucid dream, you may have like a structure or something, stuff is going on and it's pretty, set to reality, pretty real. And then you realize that, and then you say, okay, now fly. Okay, now zip away on a web. Okay, now do this, do that. And you have full control, you're lucid. But what if the initial starting point of that dream was your brain maybe receiving that type of, broken up signal, and so it doesn't have a lot to work with, and so it literally creates, basically stuff around it as it's happening, and so you start off with like your brain basically filling in 90%, and then you realize that your brain is doing this. Like, it's the reason maybe that you become lucid in the first place. You have this realization that, hey, this is strange. Maybe I recognize this, but I don't know how I recognize this. And all it is basically that. Does that make sense?
Exactly. And I think that could also be in part to where it seems like you don't have next to any time once you realize that you're lucid and you start making those changes before you're taken out of that dream and you wake up or whatever.
Exactly.
And I think that could be part of it, to where it was like, this is too far from the source material. We're done with this. Kind of like the brain in it talking to itself type of thing.
It could imply that maybe your brain has like a sense of directive or it has like a lesson, that it wants you to achieve with any dream. And even to the extent that it's interesting to theorize whether whenever you are basically skipping these frequencies, allowing you to, experience something that's not going on right now in our physical reality, it'd be interesting to see. Dude, I keep getting like up there in that thought, and then it just completely loses me. But all of this stuff is so interesting, and I wish that I could keep my train of thought so badly with all of this, because it's so out there, and man.
So one of the things that we had drawn, and I don't remember necessarily the full context of this, but it was, and I think we may have already touched on the reason that we had wrote this down, is the idea of like the crossing over, punching the hole in the proverbial piece of paper, and then going back out, and you can't necessarily fill that hole again. And that analogy is analogous to the thing that I mentioned earlier of once you do something, it's easier to do. When you died and you had those experiences of the immaterial, then that hole is still there that allows your brain or whatever to kind of keep going back to that, or at least access it much easier.
Right.
I know one of the things that we also talked about was the idea of ourselves existing infinitely,
Right.
always, at any time.
Right. And I'd actually really like to get into that. Hopefully, I don't lose my train of thought with this subject. Oh, gosh, I keep bumping into this. Yeah, it's really interesting. So, one of the things that he mentioned on the previous take was that, well, we could exist in the 1500s, and I was like, well, wouldn't that, mean that our family would have to like rapidly reproduce at a rate that is unheard of? And basically, his answer was no, and it's the idea that like your soul doesn't necessarily depend on your body that you're in right now. So the idea being is that you and so the me talking, my soul is different from the brain, right? It is different. It is a completely different entity. You with me so far?
The difference between hardware and software.
Yes. You have anything to add on any of that?
So it was talking about how, to a certain level, us, the people that are sitting here making this video, are a product of our circumstances, and without the idea of me existing in a different time doesn't inherently mean that all of my circumstances are exactly the same.
Right.
But it could have a cumulative effect that would create me, like my person, without it being like my parents are exactly the same and did the exact same things, but they could have a similar effect to the point to where I could exist all the time, infinitely.
Yeah, so I mean it's kind of crazy to think about. So it's kind of the idea that like I could be anywhere around the world, I could be here, I could be there, I could be at this period in time or that period of time, and it's kind of negligible. It's just dependent on the circumstances leading up to my soul being dropped down.
And to that end, I think that obviously like I can cease to be. Like
Right.
our hardware has a finite amount of time. But
Right.
I don't believe that our soul does.
No,
And so
I
to
agree.
that end, in terms of God seeing a particular need for my soul, for your soul,
Right.
and using that to create a person, for lack of a better word, and that's kind of how we can end up existing infinitely in the context of the way that we've been talking about it.
Right.
While it's still being us, but not. And that, you see what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. And to further expound on the idea and kind of moving away from the idea that you could be anyone at any time, because, I mean, if you're looking at it from the standpoint that this is existing infinitely, most of the time it would be reasonable to say that we are existing around the same time. It's fair.
That would be the highest probability
Yeah.
of the world creating me, if that made sense.
Yeah, agreed. And obviously it's impossible to say for sure. I will say one thing that is interesting to all of this, taking into consideration with quantum entanglement and its effects, across, not just here, but across the entire, so to speak, multiverse, quantum multiverse. All of those effects. So one of the ways that can appear, for instance, is with Thomas Edison. I believe it said that Thomas Edison had dreams leading up to the creation of the light bulb, where he constructed it, he built it, and that actually led him to the construction and building of the light bulb itself. And it makes me wonder, if Thomas Edison, if my roommate, if anyone is existing infinitely, that they would be able to see, if they resonate at a certain frequency at any point into their life by kind of aligning themselves with the frequency of someone who has already, for instance, created the light bulb. By that point, that the connection between the resonance frequencies will allow younger Thomas Edison to then have a dream, which he perceives to be a dream, of him constructing something that is unheard of, which would be the light bulb. But actually, that's not a dream at all. It is literally the interconnectedness
Of creation.
Yeah, well, yes, of creation, but himself in general. So, like, the idea that if, for instance, getting a little bit more simple with it, if I had a dream that someone passed away, and a few days later they passed away in the same exact way as a dream. I didn't just predict the future. I'm not predicting the future. I'm not time traveling. But what I am doing is seeing a possible parallel which occurs infinitely a lot. And if it occurs infinitely a lot, then it's going to cause an emotional, basically an emotional spike. And I believe these emotional spikes are kind of what these frequencies pick up. Because oftentimes whenever we experience these dreams going into the future or we have visions or anything like that, they're usually of events that are really good or really bad, more seldom neutral. And in my opinion, the reason in which it's doing that, actually have it on the board. Have it on the board. Let's try to get it up there. All right, so what we are looking at is right here. This is all of the highs in your life, basically the blue. The red represents all of the lows, right? So this black line represents the space-time continuum, the linear line that we all follow, right? So what you're seeing right here is you asleep, this black line. Whenever you are asleep, your frequency maybe goes to this point higher. And now, despite you being maybe at this point in your life right here, like 20 years old, you are experiencing a dream of something that is amazing that happens to you at like 40. Cool. Same thing with these. Maybe you're having a really bad sleep and you have a horrible nightmare, and then it ends up coming true. Same difference. You're basically outsourcing your frequency and aligning it with other frequencies of similar nature. Anything to add on that?
Not necessarily in regards to that exactly, but just in terms of getting inspiration from dreams. It's interesting to think about what truly inspires a person. And if it's like at a certain level, obviously you can get inspiration from other people, but there has to be a real level where you get the inspiration from yourself. Whether you decide something and you can inspire yourself to do it, or you literally get a glimpse of something through a dream that you have done, and you have then inspired yourself. And it's not time travel or anything like that, because it's existing at the same time.
Yes.
Differently.
Yes. Yes. And I want to be very clear about that. This isn't time travel. I actually don't really believe in the idea of time travel. I believe in the idea of I can go to the 1930s, but it's going to take me slipping through a portal in which that dimension, that universe is the 1930s right now. Right? So
I think inevitably I'm of the opinion that time travel erases itself, if that makes sense. You know, you literally go back in time like you've seen in movies, like Back to the Future type thing, and you change something. I think inevitably you change things to the point where you don't go back in time, which either makes it never happen or erases it or whatever. But I do think with everything existing infinitely at the same time, you can very easily... I don't necessarily like the term like hopping dimensions per se, but you can go there, whether in dreams or whatever, and go to a different time that is now, but the year is 1402 or whatever.
Almost making time travel obsolete in nature.
Exactly.
Which is really interesting to consider. Also, even more interesting to consider that if you were to go to these parallel dimensions that are pretty accurate to us, it'd still be different, right? So you wouldn't be getting the full picture if I went to a universe in which it was the age in which T-Rexes existed. There's not a promise that the T-Rex would exist. There's a very, very big likelihood, but it's not a promise. And again, I mentioned this on my last video, but it is so interesting to find a way to hone whatever it is that is allowing us to have these dreams, have these visions, and even looping it back to the idea of like what drives the sense of self to do certain things, what drives inventors to do this, to do that. I know for me personally, I have had dreams where I create something or I make something. I'm yet to do that, but I have it up here. I know how to do it. Pretty insane things, and I just need the money. I need like 25 grand if anyone wants to send me that in the comments. Just really, really easy stuff, and I got it built. But I understand that, and it's like, did I have that dream because it is a big moment for me? right? And I built that, and then it's shared down in the form of a dream or a daydream, or is that purely just my brain getting creative? Because I don't feel like we understand very much about the science of what our brain is doing whenever we sleep. And even going back to the idea of lucid dreaming, one of the things that you had asked me is like, are we going and experiencing alternate versions of ourselves every night? Because sometimes I lucid dream and I fly, and obviously that's not an alternate version. So again, maybe a little bit of the lost signal getting correlated into a full dream, but also at the same time, it might not be at all. And I mean,
Yeah, I think that just gets into some dreams are fiction and some dreams would be, your brain flexing its muscles for a
Right.
certain extent.
right,
But there is a really, really fuzzy line, if there is a line at all, on the inspiration for those dreams.
right, right. How is this happening, guys? I would be willing to imagine if I had 100,000 people who watch this, that at least 20% of them would definitely have stories about having dreams like this, about having experiences like this. Again, and it's not just dreaming, it can be daydreaming. Daydreaming is just as real, oftentimes maybe even more real than a regular dream. And obviously, all of this is science, right? None of this is obvious. I mentioned paranormal stuff earlier. This type of stuff is maybe you can have paranormal stuff happen in your dream, right? But this is very scientific, and even to the extent of the unexplainable nature of quantum physics going into the quantum multiversal theory, all of this is at its core, building blocks. And you cannot be scared to ask questions that basically shake your fundamental grip of reality in itself. And you cannot be afraid to basically come to the conclusion immediately that everything that you thought that you understood and that you knew about the universe may actually just be wrong.
To that end, I think that thinking about things, talking about things, trying to understand stuff that we have no idea of how to do, or whatever it is, like we don't understand it, is inherently valuable and necessary, because human beings have been doing that since the literal beginning of time, whether it
Yes.
was trying to understand fire,
Right.
architecture, oxygen, atoms, the structure of our solar system. Those are all things that inherently, when those ideas were first brought up, it was, that's crazy. There's literally no way to ever think about
Right.
that or do it or prove it or whatever. And guess what? And so to that end, I think science is the pursuit and the attempt at explaining the miracles that God works through.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. There is a big push on whether you are on the side of theology or science, right? If you're a Christian, and if you're on the side of science, right, then you believe in these things. If you're on the side of theology, but in my opinion, and I know we both share this opinion, that they are absolutely one and the same, right? You use science as a kind of measurement tool to understand what God has done. I use science. We use science. Even those who don't believe in God. We all use science, unbeknownst or beknownst, to the end of trying to understand what God has done.
And to that end, I think the idea of these incredibly complex sciences and things like that is one of the primary things that I think of when we talk about this, or when I read papers on various things. The primary thought in my mind is, wow, like God is a true architect. He is a true artist. Like, this is beautiful, because I believe that this is the physical way that God accomplished the things that he has said he has done.
Right. I have a question that you can't answer, but I want to know your opinion. If everything does exist infinitely, I personally believe it does, why would God do that? Why wouldn't he just have us be it? Why would he do it infinitely? Or are we thinking too small, and we are literally too our brains aren't even complex enough to understand the nature of what his actual intentions are.
I think that would be my leaning, but I also think that it's kind of easy to say is, oh well, we just can't understand that. So my lob out there, my guess is that why would God limit himself in his creative potential?
Right.
Like, if we're talking about us existing infinitely, that's still us.
Right.
He still created us. And just the way that everything is working together is, I believe that everything is done for a reason. And so if some people or all of us or things like that are able to get glimpses into the more unknowable, I think that is inherently by design, and it is for us to continue to learn and understand. And maybe one day in the future, we will have a completely different understanding of everything, of science, which will then inform our views on religion and things like that, while still retaining the same essence of God's infinite creativity and power and generousness.
You're absolutely right. This stuff is crazy, and it is beyond really anything that I could ever comprehend. And I'm trying to. And again, it is good to ask questions. It is good to try to understand, and it's interesting, to understand the perspective of why we exist infinitely. And maybe it's the idea that I can't learn every lesson that I need to in this life alone. So there is a infinite scope of butterfly effects, which if you don't know what the butterfly effect is, it's the idea that every choice, has a branch. It's like the idea that if things were to exist infinitely, like things are always going to be different because people are going to make different choices, right? And so
I think and I've mentioned this to you before when you're just spitballing, but I think, if you were to ask my opinion, I think that the purpose of life, I think why we are here, is to experience everything. Mm-hmm. Whether that be the lowest lows and the highest highs and everything in the middle. I think that we are meant to, for lack of a better word, see everything, experience everything, know everything to a certain extent. But what I think is, we are a blip in this world's lifetime, and I think that possibly the reason, or one of the reasons that we are able to, and God has allowed us to exist infinitely across all time, is to get the whole picture. If all that I can understand, if I understood everything about the world right now, that's not understanding everything about the world in 100 AD.
So maybe,
or 1400.
So maybe whenever I die, I combine with every version of myself, and I have the whole picture. And in my entire life, I've had this idea of like, I want to ask God this, this, and this. But then I die, and existing infinitely, I have learned infiniteness, and I get to heaven, and it is all warped up, including the things that I learned in my life, which all of the other versions of Spider-Man didn't learn. It's all there. That could make total sense.
Doesn't that sound like heaven?
Yes.
Understanding everything,
and not even having to go question God because you've lived all of it.
Exactly. You just you get up there, and it's not some crashing brainwave of you trying to understand everything. You just get it, and you can't do that in one lifetime, and so you get an infinite number.
Well, right, man. That's crazy to think about. One of the things that we mentioned in our previous take was the idea of feeling as if you'd been here before, and the idea of reincarnation. And so I don't necessarily believe in the idea of reincarnation, although there is something going on with the idea of feeling as if you've been here before. I mean, even me, I feel like there are certain things that I understood at a much earlier age. My subconscious is telling me things that I really shouldn't know at a very early age. And so there is a very interesting phenomenon going on with I mean, you can't call it reincarnation, right? But the idea that what if, I don't know, the same soul could be used across like a version of me that's born at this time and then I die, but then in a parallel universe here it's shifted all the way over and then it just moves up one and then I start a new life all over again and live it out.
I think you're really getting onto it, because it's one of those things is with the whole idea of existing infinitely across all time. While at the same time sometimes there's older versions of you that are still in the now, and younger versions, things like that. And I think,
Right.
especially in the context of the dreams that we've been talking about, it does allow you to understand things that you may not have literally experienced or decided or whatever. And I think
Right.
that's part of at least where that feeling comes from, is because you haven't done that
Right.
necessarily, but you have.
I have.
If that makes any sense at all.
Like, for example, if you come into the world and you are automatically incredibly gifted at something at a young age, or if you, again, are in a Thomas Edison situation and you have a dream which leads you to something incredible, implying that an alternate version of Thomas Edison did, in fact, invent the light bulb, giving the younger Thomas Edison the potential of having the dream, thus creating the light bulb. But what's even interesting is that the initial Thomas Edison that created that light bulb could have been given a vision at a young age of another version of himself further along, creating the light bulb, which begs the question. If we're looking at this like stepping stairs, how far up does it go, and does that have to happen? For example, does Thomas Edison have to continuously be shifting between these dreams that are giving him this and people who invent this and this because it needs to happen, or is it still purely a 50-50 choice on whether this person does it or not? If that makes sense.
No, it does. I'm just trying to figure out what I think about it, because it's a really interesting concept.
Yes.
I think I would liken it to not necessarily fate, and not necessarily in terms of free will. I think fate in term kind of describes the idea of God knows what you're going to do, but that Him knowing what you're going to do does not make you do it. You still have that choice. He just knows the choices.
Right.
He has seen your entire life, and He knows each and every choice that you will make. And that does not doom you to make that choice. It just means that you will end up making that choice of your own free will.
Okay, but so maybe it could imply that that choice is made not on a 50% basis, but more on like a 90 to 70 to anything in between, whatever number basis, and the degree that there could be an infinite version of Thomas Edison that did not invent the light bulb.
Exactly. And I think there's a certain extent to where if we exist infinitely always, we also don't exist infinitely always.
Yeah.
And that just kind of goes into, I'm not needed in every eventuality. You're not, none of us are, but we are needed in
Where we
whatever
are.
percentage. You can't put a percentage on infinite, but
Right.
I think that we exist in the, like, I don't like to use the word timelines,
Right.
but we exist in the ones that we need to be in. We exist in the ones where we have something to learn. And once that we have learned all that we can,
Yeah.
I think we move on.
Yeah, this is something that I don't know if it's more for comfort or if I really believe it. Maybe I do a little bit. Maybe I do a lot. The idea that, and I've had friends that have passed on years ago, really early, unfortunately. And one of the things I've always heard from those wiser than me are that the ones who go early, they've done it, right? They've learned it.
Yeah, I've heard the
I'm
same
kind of
thing.
getting emotional right now, but despite how much I may miss a lot of them, I mean, they must have figured out something that I haven't figured out yet to, get the cart right up there, right? So, very interesting to ponder. And all of this is, again, I don't want anyone to come onto these videos and be like, oh, these guys don't know anything. It's like, we're not claiming to know anything.
Well, and we don't. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's just like putting ideas out there.
But we know nothing.
Right.
And I think the pursuit of trying to understand more is part of why we are here. Why all of us are here is because there is something to learn.
Right. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. I had a dream that I dressed up as Spider-Man and used my stuff to make videos, which eventually, over the course of 6 months, led me to do it. And here I am today doing it. And I can't really help but feel that it's very coincidental that I'm, now talking about the very thing that led me to this. And I would be really curious to hear from you guys if you have had any similar situations. I don't even know what that would look like. It's a very generalistic question, but just, a dream that you had that led to something, or maybe something bad, maybe something good.
Or dreams that you've learned something from, whether it be minuscule of, maybe I shouldn't do this in the future or whatever,
right.
Or something that you have seen that you wanted to do and that you haven't done yet. Anything like that. We'd love to hear about it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And again, this is stuff that we don't really understand. I'm not claiming to understand, and I really, I encourage you guys with your friend groups to talk about this kind of stuff. Kind of get an idea of where people are at, if they even want to talk about this at all. Most people don't. I'm not going to lie. Most people, I try to sit down with them and I'll have a conversation about any of this kind of stuff, not just about dreams, but just in general. It's just kind of what I've mentioned on previous videos. The idea of wonder and curiosity is certainly a dying breed, especially here in America. And it's very, very unfortunate. And all of this stuff is so interesting to me, and I'm going to continue to make more videos about it. And I really just wanted to bring him on here because he was asking me about it whenever he got back, and I kind of wanted to immediately include him in something, right? And to answer the lucid dream question. And again, it's a percentage. Sometimes you experience an altered version. Sometimes you experience an actual dream. Sometimes you get a lot and you see a lot. Sometimes you get a snippet and then your brain takes that and then you have the opportunity to use that to become lucid, right? Who knows? I don't know.
There's only one thing that does, and we won't meet him in this lifetime.
No, and man, I'm really actually going to be honest, guys. I feel like I'm a little bit behind terminology wise with a lot of this stuff, and I would like to be able to appear more articulate whenever talking about this kind of stuff. And I feel like it's kind of difficult with the nature of all of this, and especially with the idea that I'm not kidding. I keep losing my train of thought because of how, this, like, I'm trying to, I have a very photographic mind, meaning I see things in my mind, and trying to imagine these graphs on graphs on graphs, and then all of this information it's just it's crazy. I don't know about you. I don't know how your brain works.
I'm very similar. I think very photographically, and I try to put pictures and essentially create movies in my mind of things like that. Just like, for example, when I read, I see it.
Yes.
But I think that the only thing to do to kind of get better at that is to do it. The human mind, the human body gets better with repetition. The more you do it, the more comfortable you are with it. And that goes from everything to public speaking to thinking about certain things.
Right.
Is the life lesson of just keep at it. That's a very true thing, and especially for human beings who are trying to improve. Is you have to do the things that you're not good at. You have to think about the things that you don't understand, because if you don't, you go nowhere.
Yeah. I'm not even going to lie. I woke up this morning and didn't really know anything about any of this stuff and tried to make a video about it because it's really interesting to me. And I tried. I need you guys to know that I'm going to get smarter in this stuff, I promise. And eventually the videos are going to be pretty cool. And it's going to be a lot, I guess, better production wise, in the sense that I'm actually going to know a little bit more about what I'm talking about. And, I want to continue to bring my roommate on too. I think it's fun to have someone with a similar mind in terms of being able to breach out there in terms of what we know is reality and what could be reality once science, comes to that point. But again, I want to reiterate this. Don't ever shy away from thoughts that you feel like you can't get to the bottom of. You should try. If there is something that feels like it's too big for you to understand, then there's nothing stopping you from at least trying.
The things that are too big to understand are oftentimes the most worth understanding.
I couldn't agree more. And that's how I feel about these dreams. Right? And that's how I feel about paranormal stuff, about any spiritual occurrence that could go on in our life.
We're trying to record, brother.
Yeah, that's the kitty cat. The boy.
Get ready for your 15 minutes of fame.
Oh, man. Yeah, I wonder what Figaro dreams about. Figaro. How you doing, buddy?
Figaro, meow if you dream. Oh? Is that just a big nothingness void in there, buddy?
It must be. Figaro, are you dreaming about perceptual resonance across parallel probability fields? I didn't think so.
He just looks away from us and closes his ears.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Man, I want to mention one more thing just because I said that before we get off of here. The idea that kind of societally, worldwide for generations, the idea of animals being able to experience paranormal phenomenon is very interesting. I probably should make this a separate video, but I'm not going to. I'm going to mention this for like 2 minutes. I don't really... I mean, I kind of believe it. Do you believe it?
I think that there's lots of instances, whether it be natural disasters or seeing things that we can't see. I think that they understand or see or are capable of perceiving a lot more than us. And it might be different, but I think there's definitely something there for sure. And yeah. I think it goes back to, and we'll make a longer video on this, but the idea of only humanity was punished.
Yeah.
Animals and everything weren't. And so there's something that those creatures and all creatures are privy to that we just aren't.
It's okay, so it's almost like whenever Adam and Eve initially ate that fruit, it's like we had horse blinders put on, but almost like they got taken off instead, if that makes sense. Like our blinders to the ignorance of being naked and all of this, sin and cruelty and evil got taken off, and now we can see it clear as day.
And you just made me think about this, and I read something that I realized that the term naked didn't, at least in terms of back then, it didn't literally mean that they suddenly realized that they weren't clothed. It's more to the idea of we realized how frail we were and how little we were, how vulnerable we were. And
so it's more like an expression than it is. Okay.
Right. I don't think it's meant literal.
Okay. Interesting.
And so that's interesting to think about how, it could either be, depending on how you look at it, the blinders were taken on or off. And we're now privy to, and we see a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter and didn't need to matter.
Right.
And we have made it matter.
We have made it matter.
If that makes sense, just in
it absolutely does.
The indomitable human ego.
And guys, I challenge you to think about what he means by that. What do you mean by we have made it matter? Think about all the things in your life that you give so much attention to that absolutely won't matter. Think about the things in your life that even if you don't want to believe in any type of afterlife, let's say it happens, think about the things that are going to matter if when you make it to that afterlife, and I promise you a lot of the things that we're doing, and I say this because I'm one of them, aren't important, right? They're just not. They're distractions. So yes, I think you're right on the spot about that. But man, again, this is really just for fun. I'm gonna hop on here probably tomorrow and make another video, maybe trying to further explain some of this stuff, maybe about something totally different. It's really just gonna depend if anyone actually watches these videos and has questions about it. Um, but I might come back to it at a later point. But I hope to see you guys soon, and I hope that you guys stay curious and stay wondering about what's going on. I'll see you guys later.